Welcome to Intelligent Think, the podcast in which we explore what makes ideas great, how we can make our thinking better, and why it's so important to share your ideas with the world. Plus, we'll talk to thought leaders and authors about their own ideas and experiences so you can mine them for gold nuggets that will help you on your own journey. I'm Verity and this is Intelligent Think. And today, our fabulous guest is Megan Dougherty, the co-founder of One Stone Creative, a podcast production agency specializing in white label podcast production and network development. Megan is also the creator of the State of Business Podcasting Report and author of Podcasting for Business, How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference for Your Company. And I'm going to be honest, all of those podcast things are really making me nervous about how much more experienced you are at this. Megan also currently lives in Western Quebec with her spouse, 2 cats, 5 chickens, and over 65 thriving houseplants. So I think you also might need to share your secrets with me as I'm barely able to keep one plant alive. So welcome to the show, Megan.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And my secret to plants is buy ones that don't die easily.
You know, I've tried that and still they die on me. Still, I've got a cactus that's died on me.
That's a skill of its own.
Yeah, exactly. I've managed to keep 2 children alive so far. So I'm like, well, clearly that's okay.
You've got that one up on me. Not that I've let any children expire. I don't have any, but you're probably, for the global scheme of things, keeping children alive, probably a couple notches up the ladder compared to
we would think that, except that I still seem incapable of keeping houseplants alive. So you never know. Well, I'm so excited to have you here today because obviously you know all about this podcasting business, and we sort of started ours accidentally because we wanted to create some video content and we might as well start a podcast too. But I'd love to know kind of how you got into the podcast space and what it is that you love about podcasts.
Well, I never set out to get into podcasting. I didn't have that as a dream. It wasn't a goal. I wasn't even super familiar with podcasting when I got into it. So my background is in digital marketing and marketing education and online and audience building and development, all of that kind of stuff. And I was in between projects at one point, and then an old colleague who I'd worked with before, she reaches out one day out of the blue and she says, hey, do you want to start a business together? And I said, okay. I'd love to. Then we figured out, okay, we're going to start a business. What should we do? Well, her background was in audio. So she was on the radio in Dallas. She was a sound engineer, on-air talent. And she was, deep into podcasting on the back end of things from as soon as podcasting became a thing, she was right there. So we took her knowledge, combined it with my marketing knowledge, and we go, okay, we're going to do podcasts for business owners and we're going to do it better than anybody else does. And we've been doing it since 2017.
I love it. And so for you, what was that kind of transition into podcasting like? You obviously had all of this marketing knowledge. Where were the big learning curves? What did you have to understand that you didn't know about before?
Oh gosh, I had to learn so many things, starting from the beginning, what's an RSS feed? What are the steps in post-production that we need to follow? How do you promote a podcast? I didn't know any of that when we started. But happily, a lot of marketing is really transferable from one area to another. When you've got something that you want people to share, you have to tell them about it. That's going to be true no matter what it is. So we started really from the beginning of, all right, we know a business owner creates all sorts of content. I've got lots of experience blogging, for example. What can we pull from that and add into podcasting? And as the industry has developed, we've been able to grow with it. And it's just, you do something enough for a couple of years and you start to be pretty good at it. But it was that sort of the need for more knowledge, which had us start what you mentioned in the intro as the State of Business Podcasting Report, because people would ask me questions and I wouldn't necessarily know the answer. So I was like, well, there's a solution for that. I can get that data. That data exists. It's out there. So we started looking at the top 100 best performing shows. I mean, okay, how do they do their art? How are they promoting on social? What are they doing for sponsorship? So we started establishing best practices. Then when somebody asked me, it's like, oh, what day of the week should I release? I could be like, well, it's your podcast, release whenever you want. But most guys do it on Tuesdays because we knew. So that's how we did it. It was just rigorous counting.
I love that. And I love that you've gone, we know what we want to be in the best in the world at. We know the skills that we've already got. And now we're getting asked these questions. And that's what then shows us what we need to do more research on, what we need to upskill on. And I think that it's a piece that people often forget about is you don't have to know everything up front. And it's okay to start a business or start sharing ideas, even if you only know a piece of it, because the questions that people ask will be what gives you the real value to flesh out that idea, right?
Exactly. And I think being willing to say, not just to others, but to yourself, I don't actually know this. And then being willing to address that head on and, being like, okay, I don't know this, but I can learn it. Now that I know that I don't know it, I can figure it out. And that's how we run the whole business really is, the information is out there somewhere and we can get it and distill it. And as we got more experience over the years doing, these podcasts for business owners, we were able to start experimenting and start breaking down and finding patterns and starting, using little bits of podcasts as building blocks to do different things. And that's really when I think for me, the fun really started, was being able to take the systematic and building approach to podcasting.
Yeah. And the experimental, I love that. Like we often say, you've got to think like a scientist when you're trying to build thought leadership, because it's all about testing out ideas and going, oh, that didn't really connect. That didn't really work. Or people didn't really understand that. How do I do it in a different way? And so I love that you're taking that approach with podcasting as well.
That was the entire reason we had our first podcast. So I've got my original podcast. We broke every single best practice in the book because we wanted to test out every different thing. So was it consistent? No, we changed the format up all the time so we could test out the different formats and see what they were like to do. And release cadences, we changed everything from season to season. And so it was it was a podcast that never got famous. Not many people listened to it, but it was the best learning tool that we had in the business. And for that, it was just so worth the investment in it.
Oh, I love that. We sort of see it, I think, the same way so Christina wrote her book last year. Well, she wrote most of it over the year or two beforehand. And we'd written lots of books for clients, but we'd never actually kind of been through the experience ourselves. We'd just started getting asked to write books. And so we sort of viewed it as a bit of an experiment and like, how would we want to approach this if we were doing it for ourselves? And I think we learned some things. We did some things really not well that I would like to have done differently, but it gave us really good lessons now that have made us much better at what we do for clients as well. And I love that approach of like, actually, you do have to experiment and do it for yourself.
You've just got to do it. Like, I mean, it's they say sometimes those who can't do teach, but those who have done probably teach better. So it's good to, and it gives you more empathy too, right? Like, I don't know if you found as you were writing a book and you're like, I'm going to be nicer to my clients about this. I'm going to be a little more empathetic when we're talking about this topic from now on. I definitely had that experience.
Christina's definitely said that. So like, I haven't written my book yet, but I don't do a massive amount of client work because I'm usually out talking to everyone publicly instead. I'm being the loud one. But she said exactly that. She's like, I knew how hard it was in some ways, because even if we're writing, like if we're ghostwriting for a client, it's still a really hard process. But the process of, I think, the questioning your confidence, the questioning your ideas, all of that was something quite new. And now she has really different empathy, I think, for our clients, which is really cool. And I think they appreciate that. Yeah, now when she works with them, they know she's been through it herself.
Oh, I bet they are. Because for me, it was about having a production runway and being not like at the very limit of when you could submit audio to have it ready. And I was always just like, how hard can it possibly be to get audio in this far in advance? It can be pretty hard. Yeah. And I should be nice to people when they're a little late once in a while. Yeah. Yeah. Now I've been there.
I love it. So how do you help clients decide whether a podcast is right for them and what kind of podcast? Because I know that you've got a bit of a framework of like, whether a podcast is right, what the right kind of podcast is. How does somebody go about making that decision?
Yeah, and it's a big decision too, because even when you get a lot of help, it's a lot of work, and even when you're doing a lot of it yourself, it's still going to be an expensive and time-consuming thing. So the way I always approach podcasting, it's business first. So the podcast industry is very big, and it's filled with lots of wonderful, generous people who are very kind and sharing of their knowledge, and a lot of them are talking about podcasting as a passion project. This is something that you're doing for yourself. Maybe it's a little more important to you than a hobby, but it is your passion. A lot of other people start podcasts to be businesses in and of themselves. Those are both different situations than when you are a business owner who is podcasting as a marketing or a business development tool. And that's what we focus on. So we always start with the business and what does the business need in the medium to long term, not always short term, sometimes short term, but like, what does the business need to succeed and thrive? And then we ask, can a podcast help them achieve that? And if the answer is yes, then we're like, okay, now we can explore how podcasts might do that. But if you're a brand new business owner, for example, and you're thinking I should podcast as a marketing strategy, but I've got no money coming in and I don't have enough team to help me do all the work, you should not start a podcast right now. It's not going to be, if you need sales yesterday, podcasting often not going to be the best strategy, because if that the biggest priorities in your business just cannot be helped with a podcast, don't do it. It's not the right time. But if you do need a bunch of other things, if you need to change your sales cycle, if you need to network with more people, if you need to become a little more well-known in your space, you might want to guest, but you can also podcast for that. There are things that podcasts are really good at doing. And if your business needs those and can benefit from those, then I think podcasting can be a very worthwhile investment.
I actually think committing to a podcast and committing to a book are really similar in that way. Like, you've got to decide whether it's the right move for you, but know that it is not going to get you those results in the short term. So like we have people come to us and say, I want my book to be a source of passive income. I want to make some money from it. And I'm kind of like, well, unfortunately, it's really not going to do that. You can use it to make a lot of money, but it's going to take time. You know, for a book, you're not even getting it out there for minimum a year or more if you're writing a good one. And a podcast, you know, takes time to grow. And so I think that they're really similar in that way, in that you've got to be sure that it's as you say, medium to long term strategic decision that's actually going to help you achieve what you want.
Exactly. And it's probably very much like with the book. Sometimes, like when you first release your podcast, if you do a short season, there can be like some initial launch benefits. You know, maybe if you write a book and then you send it to all of your past clients, they're like, wow, this is brilliant. We need to like sign another mandate. You know, that can happen. And we've seen that happen with podcasting too. It's like, oh, people are so excited I'm finally doing this. They're signing up for all my other stuff. And that's great, but it is very much a bonus and not necessarily part of the strategic plan, because the benefits of podcasting, they stack over time. And you know, you can see benefits fairly quickly, but it's best not to assume you're going to, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for some very potential disappointment. But if you look at it at that long game strategy, then everything you get early, amazing, off to the races. But it's over time you're going to see the benefits recurring and just increasing as you go on. Yeah,
I love that. One of the other things that I think happens when you're writing a book, and I wonder if this is similar for a podcast, is, you know, the very process of writing a book helps you evolve your thinking. So it takes you to really different places, because you're constantly, you know, you're giving yourself space to think, right? And whether that's through writing or through conversations. And I can imagine that podcasts do the same. Like, how do you see that? Do you see podcasts as sort of a professional or personal development tool as well? Or do you notice that they do a lot of that for people?
Absolutely. And that can manifest in a bunch of different ways. So some people are verbal processors, right? And they're actually going to learn what they think by talking about it. And for an entrepreneur, it can be really isolating. If you're not often having the chance to just sort of talk out what's going on, you may not know all of the stuff that you actually know. So like a solo podcast can be so amazing to give yourself, exactly as you say, the space to do that kind of thinking. And then if you do have a guest podcast as well, you can learn so much from talking to these other experts, people who you might never get a chance to meet networking, or, you know, a bar, like, oh, can I pick your brain, have some coffee? That's a really big ask. Will you be on my podcast? Is a very easy ask. It's the magic calendar opener. So you can learn from people, and you've got an expert for an hour. You can ask them whatever you want. People pay for that, and you're getting it for free just because you have a podcast. So that's like, it's an amazing way to enhance your own knowledge. And then depending on, you know, a person's workflow, there are people, and I'm so envious of them, who can sit down and riff and just have a great episode after 20 minutes of talking at a mic. I have to plan, I have to script, and then I have to edit the script so that I'm ready to kind of go. I've practiced a couple of times. And that, it helps me clarify things that are fuzzy or things that we sort of know intuitively. Okay, now I've got to make this something that other people can understand. And that process as well, I'm sure very, very similar to helping people write their books, is distilling that knowledge in a way that can be comprehended by others. It's great professional development.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of the things that we notice when people are doing the Better Book Project, which is our small group program. They find that what they can do is they bring an idea to the group, they say it out loud, they see where people understand it and don't understand it, and then they go away and write it. And like that, almost the process of, they've got to come up with the idea, they say it out loud to people, they get feedback, and then they write it. They're almost these stages of just development that take the idea further and further and further. And I can imagine that for podcasts, it's the same. Like if I'm prepping for ours, I'll be thinking about, okay, what's the topic that we want to cover? Like, what are some of the talking points? But then the conversation is really different. And then often I'll try and take that transcript and turn it into some content as well. So that way we've, you know, kind of taken it full circle. So I think it's a really similar process. And I love that idea of it kind of acting as a thinking tool for people, especially if they don't necessarily have a thinking partner.
Yeah, and I love it too. I mean, the difference with podcasting, of course, is you're doing it to publish. So it's all public, which, can be for good or ill. Sometimes it does help really clarify when it's going to be out there for people to listen to. That's helpful. But having that also, the record of your thinking over time, I find is something really interesting with the podcast. Because if you've been podcasting for a couple of years, say like every week, wow, that's a lot of content that you've put out there, and being able to go back and reuse that and pull from it and actually even say, hey, you know what? 2 years ago, I thought this. Now I think this. Here's why. There's your next episode. And so the process is really fun.
Oh, I love that. And I love that. Like, one of the things that I say to people is, if you are not a little bit embarrassed by what you had to say a couple of years ago, then you probably haven't learned enough. So I love that idea of actually going back and going, well, this was one of my first episodes and this is what I thought at the time, but here's how my thinking's evolved. Because I think that being really upfront about that evolution and the way that your thinking has changed actually builds trust with people. It makes people, respect you more. It makes them more open to what you have to say, because you're not sitting there going, this is exactly what I think, and I've always thought this, and I am right and you are wrong. You're going, actually, I've learned and I've grown. And so I love that idea of the podcast being a picture or a diary of that evolution of your thinking.
It is too, and of your skills too. I went to an arts high school, and you had to send an audition portfolio to get in. I was in the literary arts program, so I was in grade 9, about 14 years old, and I had to write some poetry and a short story and submit that. Well, the school tradition in the literary arts program was, when you were graduating, they gave you your audition portfolio back, and everyone all together in the class, and you all got to read them together. And it was horrifying as an 18-year-old to read what you had written at 14 among your friends. But it was also this amazing demonstration of how much that we'd learned. And, your podcast is like that too. Your first episode is going to sound really different than your 50th. And being able to hear that, it's going to be cringe. Your first episode's going to kind of suck. That's the way it goes. The only way out is through. And the only way to get better is practice.
Oh, I love that. I'm also very jealous that you got to go to an arts high school. We don't have those in New Zealand, and that would have been my dream. And like, can I just go like sing and perform and write and do whatever I feel like in the arts? That sounds brilliant.
It was a marvelous way to do high school, and it was divided. So there were 5 different programs. You could be in literary, visual, music, drama, or dance. And it was just. It's nice to go to high school, especially like as a weird artsy kid surrounded by other weird artsy kids. I'm very lucky to say I was able to have a very pleasant high school experience.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so cool. So you yourself are an author. We've talked a little bit about books. What was your kind of book journey like? How did you decide you wanted to write one in the first place?
Book right there.
Wait, put it right in front of your face so that it'll show up in my little TikTok videos. There we go. Okay, that's Megan's book. Great.
So it actually started through networking and through podcasting. So I was in just on a networking call from a wonderful woman that I'm in a networking group with, and we had kind of been introduced by someone, oh, you need to meet. Well, do you ever meet someone and you just get on like a house on fire, and you get on really, really well? This woman, Amy Collette, is a book coach, and we're chatting and we're just getting like really vibing, really, really getting along well. And at one point, I just thought, okay, I've been meaning to write a book forever. You've been thinking about getting back into podcasting. So what if you take me through your book coaching program? We will document the entire process as a documentary style podcast, and we will make that a straight swap. And it worked. It worked really, really well. So she coached me through how to write the first draft of the book. And we documented like our coaching sessions and supplemental interviews and all this, and we turned it into a video podcast to go on her site so that her potential clients could see what it's like to be coached by her and what the result can be. And I got this amazing book out of it. So it was this wonderful, that's how it kind of came up. Like many people, I've kind of been like for years, okay, we've got this cool framework. I've got all this data. I should write a book, but I was never going to do it alone. I would have done it alone had I been able to do it alone. So I can highly attest to the value of coaching and support for this kind of project. And writing it was so much fun. I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed being able to go back through all those years of blog posts and podcast episodes that I had and be able to repurpose a lot of that. It was just, I found it a tremendously joyful experience creating the book.
I love that. That's so nice to hear. I feel like a lot of people focus on what's hard about it. So I love that you found it so joyful.
Oh, it was such a treat to be like, okay, I've done my meetings, I've answered my emails. Okay, amazing. I've got a couple writing hours now. And it would just be like my treat at the end of a workday. And I really, if I didn't have to market it, I would want to write another book right away. But now, just considering all the other stuff that goes into the book, I'm like, okay, one and done. I'm good.
You never know. Give it 5 years, you might change your mind.
Give it 5 years. Well, there's going to be all new data in 5 years. Who even knows what podcasting is going to look like in 5 years? We might need another one.
That's true. There might be a totally different kind of media that you're dealing with at that point.
Oh, it could be. Yeah. And I guess what I'd set out to do with the book is, I mean, it is technically a business book, but I wanted it to be a textbook. I wanted it to be the textbook to make a profitable podcast. And that for me felt like, it's not like an important going to solve world hunger kind of goal, but I did want to have something really solid in the industry that I could point to and say, no, this is the way to do it. This is data-based. It's evidence-based. You can do this. It's in the book. And I have that. And I love being able to do that.
I love it. Oh, that's so exciting. Well, I've started reading it. I haven't finished it. I should have finished it before now, but 2 children really get in the way of that.
I mean, it is a little textbooky. It can be a bit dense. So I don't know.
Well, I'm picking your brain now. So that's sort of giving me my shortcut, and then I'll go at the end. So how have you seen maybe other authors or other thought leaders use their podcasts effectively? So for people who maybe either don't have a big business, like it's just them and they're the expert, or people who have a business but are building it off the back of their expertise and their knowledge, how have you seen people use them well?
Oh gosh, there are so many exciting ways. And let's start with authors. Let's start with nonfiction authors. So here's a scenario you and your listeners are probably very familiar with: is you've written the book, it's been edited, you've got the art done, you've got your promo campaign, you've even maybe got a podcast tour where you're going out to promote it, and people read the book. They buy it. They get excited about it. They're happy. What do they do then? One of my favorite uses for an author for a podcast is it's the single next step after someone reads the book, because they've invested in you. You know, they've gotten the book, they've read it, it's great, but they've read your voice, on the page. They haven't heard it yet. So a podcast could be a really great way to take someone from that next step. It's okay, I've read you, I want more. Great, now I can hear your voice in my ear, and we're gonna cook dinner together for the next 6 weeks. So I think for a lot of authors, a limited series, 6, 10, 12 episodes that extend the conversation from the book is a wonderful bridge to get people from readers into being something a little bit more. And if you'll forgive me for one moment. Pardon me, I just had to cough there.
Real good.
Some other really interesting things is I know a lot of authors, you do in the space. I work with a lot of authors. Rarely have I heard one say, in my book is absolutely every thought I had about this topic. It contains all of my research and all of my ideas about it, and I don't have anything more to say on the topic. It doesn't happen that often. So a podcast can be a really good way to keep having the discussion with your community, experts that you want to interview, other ideas you want to explore, like that one chapter you had to cut because there just wasn't space for it. Mm-hmm. All of this can go into a podcast so that you can keep, exploring this thing that you're passionate about. And that can be a really, really fun thing to do. Those are a couple. Why don't you respond and then I can go on if you like.
I was going to say, we often talk about how an unfortunate part of the book process of making the book good is that you've got to kill your darlings. There are pieces, like when Christina was working on her book, she came up with this whole model for almost like personality types. They weren't, but sort of different archetypes of the reluctant thought leader. And there were 4, and she spent weeks and weeks and weeks on it, and people connected with it, but when she got down to it, it just didn't fit, and it just didn't make sense for the reader journey and the flow, and it just didn't work. And so, but she's brought it up a few times on our podcast, so I'm like, actually I can see exactly that, how sometimes those darlings that you've got to kill can come through in conversations in other ways.
And that might even be a fun thing as a supplement to your main podcast. If it's something you're going to refer back to again and again, record 8 episodes, maybe an idea of one of each of the archetypes, and then a conversation with someone who is that kind of archetype. And then you have something to feed people back to again and again, and it's going to keep growing. It'll get more downloads. It'll keep people on your website. It'll just kind of feed that machine of your content in a really evergreen way. And that's I think a great use case.
Yeah, I love it. We just need to add another podcast into our list now.
I mean, the first one's a gateway podcast. But you can
I
also,
love it.
add like a special series. You podcast normally for a while and then go, okay, it's summer holidays, so we're going to do the special 8-episode series, and that can stand alone but also be part of your main feed.
Nice. I love it. And so you were going to continue on, I think, with some other really cool things that people have done. So keep telling me.
Yeah. So one of my favorite use cases for podcasts, and this is one of the ones where I've seen people get the most ROI from shows that it seems like nobody listens to. So if I told you about a podcast that it was, say, for financial advisors, and if I told you that never more than 100 people listen to it every month, it would probably not sound like it was very successful. But if I told you that same company had used their podcast in their sales process to cut their sales cycle down from like 3 months to like 4 weeks, that's a massive difference to the business and how it works with people. And the way it happened is the podcast was one of the partners at this firm sharing things that he believed about the industry, his theory, problems he solved, people he's worked with, issues that he's tackled. And his sales team would direct new leads to these episodes and be like, oh, listen to him talk about this. Listen to him talk about this. And then he would get on the phone with people and they'd say, I love what you said. I want you to do for me what you did there. Let's get going. And it completely changed the way he was able to do business. He can stop podcasting after about a year because he just didn't need any more content.
Because they could just get old episodes.
You could just get an old episode. So that's like using it to nurture people who are already sort of aware of you. Super high value because you get that knowing, liking, trusting. You get the extra senses, the extra intimacy that comes from more forms of media and the voice and in the visual if you're doing video. And that can go such a long way to make someone like you. So I'm sure we were all, now we know the idea of the parasocial relationship. That's kind of that idea has entered the zeitgeist. It's so real with podcasting because when you podcast for a while and people start listening to you, people are going to come up and they're going to talk to you like they know you. And it's going to be weird, but because they've spent all of this time with you in their ear while they're like walking their dog or doing the dishes. And it's this really wonderful thing that if you're doing it strategically and using that impact you can have, it can make a really big difference on how willing people are to buy from you. So that's something I really like to see, especially in really high trust businesses. That's a really good strategy for if you've got something that's high ticket and possibly high risk. So finance, legal, a lot of those areas, that strategy can work really, really, really well. Gosh, and let's see other ones. I can keep going.
I love it. I think my favorite thing, like when you just said, they feel as though they know you. That's so true. Like I think of the podcasts that I listen to, just for fun, not necessarily business ones, but you know so much about their lives, so much about who they are as a person. Yeah. And then they meet you and they don't know you at all, but you feel like you know them and it builds so much trust. And yeah, same thing with the business ones that I do listen to. There are people that I respect and will refer people to and will send people to when I've never worked with them, but because I listen to their podcast, I trust them. So I love that.
Yeah, I love it. I remember a client told me this story recently. She had gone to a conference and someone came up to her and was just like, how is your cat? And she was like, excuse me, who are you? On your podcast weeks ago, you talked about your cat having this issue.
And you never closed the loop. You never told us what happened.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I should have told her she should have closed the loop on the show. But yes, that kind of thing can happen. It's wild. And to jump back, if I may, into another way, this can work for pretty much any business owner, any type of author. We all need to know people for our business. We all need to know people to grow our businesses. And while using a podcast like directly to sell things can be done, hard to do without being totally skeezy. Using it as the foundation to build relationships on, beautiful. And those can be referral relationships. They can be collaborative relationships. They can be co-promotional relationships. They might even eventually be, client vendor relationships. And the thing to remember with that is a podcast is not just the recording. There are touch points. So there's maybe is it a fit call? There's a tech check. There's an invitation email. There's the pre and post show chatter. There's the recording itself. There's the thank you note. Very important if you're relationship building. There's the, hey, your episode is ready message. And then there's the, hey, we got this great feedback. Here's what someone really liked. Like you've got all of these touch points that you can systematize to actually build the foundation of a real relationship on. And so when you have like a clear goal for what kind of people do I need to know in my business, structuring your show to put you in touch with those, like maybe if you are working in the event space and you need to know a lot of people who have venues that can host events, great. Start a event venue podcast. It doesn't need to have broad appeal. Sometimes the real audience of a podcast for a business owner is the guest and not the listening public. And if that's the case, then you can really, it doesn't matter how many people are listening to it because the guest is the important person. And I think that's a really important distinction for a lot of business owners who do want to really leverage relationship building from their shows.
That's such a good point. And I think it's something that you talked about the first time that we had a chat, was that idea of knowing and being really clear on what the purpose of your podcast is. So is it to create, like for us, it was because we wanted to create lots of content. And so we thought, well, we'll just record it this way. We love to talk to people. We love to talk to each other. We'll just do it this way. That was the purpose of it.
Yeah.
Whether it be some other things, maybe we should look at that. But then the purpose could be it's about building those relationships with guests and using that. And so I think being really clear on the purpose is so important, because that defines how you approach it, what your process is for it, what you talk about, I would imagine, in the podcast itself. All of those things will be different depending on what your purpose is.
Yes, that is exactly 100% it. You may not have read the whole book, but you got the thesis. Podcasting for business. And I think that's something that can be a little hard to wrap your head around, especially as a new podcast, because you look at podcasting as an industry generally, and there is like an archetype of what it seems like a podcast is, and it's going to be an interview that happens in audio and it releases every Tuesday and it's 45 minutes long, and this is a podcast. But it can be whatever you need it to be. Like you said, you started to get more video content. If that's the main reason your podcast existed and it was creating content you could use, you're winning at podcasting, because it's doing what you need it to do for your business. And you are the business owner. You're the boss of your business. You're the boss of your podcast. You can decide what makes it valuable. The trick is to be clear about what that is, and then be actually tracking, is it actually doing the thing I want it to be doing? Because that can be a lot of business owners get into. They start a podcast to have a podcast, but there's no real clarity around what does being successful in podcasting mean for me as a business owner. And that's going to be different than podcasting as a business in and of itself, or podcasting, just for the love of the game. We're business owners. It's got to pull its own weight in the business, or you can't continue investing in it.
100%. Well, we had a learning recently on ours, which is that, so we've been breaking down our podcast episodes into short clips. And then I was getting one of our team to go through and write little blurbs for those short clips to put up on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, all that stuff. And she gave us feedback, and this is why we love our team, because they give us very honest feedback, and it's always useful and always delivered in a really helpful way. She was like, without the context of the podcast, half of these are unusable. because we've just been chatting. So common, because we'd just been chatting, and we had not been thinking about the videos. We'd just been thinking about having a good conversation. And so I think it made for a really good podcast, but it wasn't necessarily giving us what we needed. So now I don't think we're quite successfully getting there yet, but we are making more of an effort to either try and start what we say with the key point and the hook or whatever it is, or kind of summarize what we say at the end so that we can use the summary as the little clip, or reflect it back to the other person so that then we can actually use that piece. So it was a really good learning for us. We went, well, the purpose of our podcast was to get some video content, and actually half of them don't make sense if you haven't had the context of the thing, which means that we're missing out on all of this content. So that was a really big learning for us, and we wouldn't have known that or changed that had we not been clear on what our purpose was for the podcast.
I know, and that's so beautiful too. You knew what you wanted. You did your first iteration. You knew what success or failure looked like, and you were able to, before you did this for months and months and months and months and months, and invest be like, oh, this is something we need to fix. We can fix it, and now you are, and it's just, that's a podcast. That's such a win. I think. I just
and I feel like I can't claim it because
without realizing.
I feel like I can't claim a win because I'm like, all we did was hire someone really smart who noticed that before we did. We weren't looking for it, but you know what?
Not the best thing you can do as a business owner is just hire someone really smart. Like that's the secret to a lot of things, I think.
Yeah. 100%. Well, that kind of brings us on to what are the big mistakes that you see people make? So, a lot of people start podcasts, as we see. A lot of them do not necessarily get very many listens. Sometimes that's not important. there's a lot of podcasts out there. I am subscribed to about 30 or 40 that, I only manage to get around to probably 5 or 6 of them all the time. So what do you see happening that you wish people wouldn't do? Or what do you see being the big mistakes that people make over and over again?
So there's a number of them. I mean, the biggest one is sort of what the whole theme of our discussion has been, and it's starting podcasting without a clear goal as a business owner. And I mean clear. Like I've heard goals from I want to build a community around this. I want to be the next Oprah. I want to, become a top 1% podcaster. Great, that and a toonie will get you a Perrier, as we see here in Canada. But getting not having that sort of clear idea of these are the things this is the job of my podcast in my business, and this is the job description of the podcast in the business, and this is the timeline on which I expect the podcast to perform its job. That's actually really, really important stuff to have. Getting beyond that, and that's kind of like the root of a lot of issues, but then there's tons of mistakes you can make otherwise. There's just oodles of them. A big one for me is and this doesn't matter for all goals, but if you want to get sponsors and if you want to get a lot of traction and you want to, really develop the podcast as a piece of media, you've got to invest in good quality editing, because anyone who knows media can clock a Descript edited podcast at 100 paces, and it just doesn't sound great. And so that kind of comes back to is, you're thinking, this is your business. How do you want to be perceived? In some cases, if you're doing it for, internal company culture to nurture a small group of people who already like you, yeah, you can have, less intense editing, no problem whatsoever. But if your goal is, hey, I want to be taken seriously as a media creator, no, you're going to have to invest in the editing. That's a big one. I think another one is, this is my biggest pet peeve probably, is people who want to establish thought leadership and they spend their entire podcast episode talking to other people and shining the light on them and their expertise and what they're good at. That's not your IP. That's not being the thought leader. That is sharing the spotlight. Very valuable to do, contrary to your stated goal. So I think that's a really big one. And finally, to round it out with 3, trying to monetize via sponsorship when you've got a whole business where you sell things. I understand the desire. I really do, because it can be expensive to cover your costs and to create an income stream with it. But your podcast can be so valuable at changing your sales process and giving you more opportunities to sell and to do all of these things, that then selling your audience's attention, for $25 for 1,000 listens is just not a good return on your investment. So I think really think about how can this be monetized indirectly. Is going to get you so much further than, I must get the download so I can get the sponsors. So that's a big mistake.
Yeah, because sponsors make sense for, a massive podcast that the only thing they're selling is the podcast, right? That is
exactly.
the one. Or maybe occasionally. Yeah, exactly. Maybe you're selling some merch or some live shows or something. But in general, that makes sense. But when you have a business that can make you probably far more money as well, what you're selling in a lot of cases is likely to be a lot more valuable. It makes complete sense that you would need to think about how you use your podcast to sell that. And it's actually, again, I think really similar to a book, because people think, oh, I'm going to sell my book to make some money. And yeah, you can, but the effort made to sell lots of copies of your book is not going to give you the same return that even just sending out your book for free to target clients, or using it to get more speaking gigs, or whatever other ways you might want to use it. You are going to get far less return trying to sell lots of books than you will using your book or leveraging your book to sell more of what you do in your business. And I think a podcast is exactly the same.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I found that with my own book. It's it was nice to have people buy the book. It was much nicer to send it to an old client and have them come back to do more podcasting services. That was well worth my $10 plus shipping to send that copy in the mail. And I think it does work the same with podcasting. It's your business is the monetization. The podcast, you are not serving the podcast to make money. The podcast is serving you to do different things. And I think when you make that kind of shift in thinking, the podcast is a tool that you can do different things, that's when you can really see a lot more value out of it. It is so similar to book writing. I didn't even realize how similar it was, but I'm really kind of getting now that it's like, okay, yeah, it's content creation, it's media creation. They're very, very aligned.
And it's a way of putting your thinking and your ideas and your expertise out into the world that can build trust, that builds reputation, that can lead people to where you want them to go within your business. Like they're both really similar, obviously in different forms. You know, a book needs to take a reader on one really clear journey. It needs to get them to a specific outcome. Whereas maybe a podcast, you know, it might be more of a discussion type format, but the goals of it, the purpose of it can still be really, really similar. And I think the way that you approach them, if you approach them with that strategy and that vision and that purpose in mind, you're going to be far more successful, whichever one of the two you're doing, or maybe both.
Oh, absolutely. I know maybe you've had someone, because I was chatting with someone, and this was about the, the value of the podcast. And she's been podcasting for a while, and it was starting to feel like a drag, and, it was costing all this money, and was she seeing anything out of it? But, we looked back at the data of the last 6 months, and I said, how many people have you met through your podcast? And she said, oh yeah, I've met all these people. How many have become clients? And she said, actually, 2 new clients have said that they found out about me through the podcast in the last 6 months. So, okay, what's your average deal value? And she said, well, actually, it's about $15,000 per engagement. So you're saying your podcast has made you $30,000 in the last 6 months, and you're tired of spending $1,000 a month on production. And she's like, not anymore. It's because you can't see what's happening if you don't measure it, right? I'm sure you've seen this in writing as well. If someone feels like, I've got this book and it's not doing anything for me. I put all this work into it, and why aren't people taking this action? But if you're not really tracking what people are actually doing, if you can't attribute the outcomes to the work that you did with your book or with your podcast, then it is going to feel like you're wasting your time on throwing good money after bad. But if you kind of set yourself up to be able to see, actually, when I send out 10 copies of my books, I'm going to get 2 client calls. I'm going to close one of them. Well, now you've got a repeatable formula, and that's like exactly, I think, the way to approach both of these assets that you're creating.
100%. And I think it also comes down to, again, what you do in terms of planning at the start. So one of the things that we've started talking a lot more to clients about recently, because we saw that lots of clients were writing these incredible books, that the people who were reading them, they were transforming their lives. They were ending up working with the author, all these things were working really, really well. But the thing that was missing was often people being really, really clear up front what they were trying to sell out the end of their book. And it wasn't necessarily that was the first step. As you say, an author can send somebody to a podcast, for example, or they might send them to free resources that they can download and then get into their email list, whatever it is. But they needed to be really clear on what is the work that I'm trying to sell out the end, because that actually gives you a better idea as well of what can you invest. Like we've got clients who one client engagement, because they work in the corporate world, one client engagement might be $50,000 or $80,000. So they can invest a lot more to make their book a success, because they know that they get 1 client, 2 clients, they have well and truly gotten a return. And then, you just scale up from there. Whereas if you're trying to sell a $97 course off the back of what your book is, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to a return on investment. So you maybe don't want to invest as much in your book, or maybe your book isn't the right path as well. So I think that's why it's really important to be clear, whether you're writing a book, whether you're doing a podcast, not only what's the purpose of it, but also what are you actually trying to sell off the end of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're promoting it in the podcast, but being clear on how you're going to get your return, I think, is really important.
Oh, I couldn't agree more or have said it better. I think that's exactly it.
I love it. So what are you excited for over the next year or two? Like, we've talked a bit about things not necessarily being great in the world, but I would hope that there's just stuff
happening. A little scary.
Yeah, exactly. But I would hope there's some cool stuff happening in your world, at least. So like in your world and your sphere of things, what are you really excited for, or trying to think about, trying to wrap your head around at the moment?
Let's see if I can answer it first, maybe professionally. I'm really excited about a new type of podcasting that we've started doing. then it kind of has come from years of working with different kinds of experts and business owners. And there's been some really common issues that are difficult for people as they're getting into it. And it's that the recording alone can be really, really challenging. The time to like come up with a really good concept and do it all, make something coherent over the course of a season can be really tough. So we just kind of said, why don't we just do it for people? And so we started a program called the Business Podcast Sprint, where we can actually take on most of the heavy lifting. So based on someone's business, we'll design a season, draft the episodes, they record it with a producer so they're not hanging out alone, and then do all the production and the distribution. So that's been really fun, and I'm really excited about it because it just makes it easier for someone who is running a whole business and probably is not overburdened with free time to get into this kind of media. So that's been really fun. I'm really excited about it. And personally, at the time of recording, and we know Canada just got a new prime minister. That was pretty great. We're happy about how that went.
Very exciting.
And at the time of recording, it's also springtime, and the garden is coming up. I'm a big gardener, so we've got grapes are new this year. I'm so excited about that. And all sorts of produce and berries. Yeah, we're growing grapes and raspberries, and so I'm excited to be a part of the world this year. It's hard to be unhappy in the springtime, and everything seems very positive.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. I'm so impressed that you're growing grapes and berries, and I was already impressed by your mini houseplants, and this is even more impressive now.
This is the year I've decided this is the year of the loofah gourd. So you know those loofah sponges?
Oh,
they come from gourds, and they're not super happy to grow where I live. It's a little cold for them, but it can be done. And I've been trying for 5 years now.
Oh my gosh.
Not sales 5 years, but this is going to be the year I'm going to grow a sponge.
I love the effort that you'll go to get your sponge. This is
it's my white whale at this point. It's
Oh, I love it. Well, I know that you've got some free things that you might be willing to share with our listeners, which I can put links in the show notes for. Do you want to check through what some of those are?
Absolutely. So we've got two particular guides that might be very helpful to you with where you are. And one is, will a podcast work for my business? And this is a simple PDF, couple of pages long, and it'll take you through a thought exercise that will help you determine whether or not a podcast is something to consider. And just definitively one way or another, yes or no, and you can kind of go from there. And the other one is for if you are already podcasting, we've got something called the Podcast Impact Assessment. And what that is it's going to kind of go through the 15 things that we've seen we've seen to make the biggest impact for podcasters. And if you've got a bunch of yeses on that assessment, you could not improve. You're doing very well. And if you are finding things that do not indicate successful podcasting, it'll give you a hit list of what to start working on to start changing that. So those are the two things that'll probably be the most useful.
I love it. Well, I will put the notes to those in the show notes and also probably do that impact assessment one myself. So I'm so thrilled that you came on today, Megan. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. And I love that we found just how many similarities there are between the book process and the podcast process.
It's so cool. I guess it's that whole sort of just imagining something and then by dint of your will and hard work, bringing it into the world. And that's for books, that's for podcasting. It's the creative part of business. And I love that they're so aligned.
100%. And just personally, I'm like, all I do in terms of media is basically read books and listen to podcasts. So I kind of
live in the life
as well. Yeah. I mean, in the time that I have between two children, but while cooking dinner, there's always a podcast going.
Yeah.
So I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You have been listening to Intelligent Think with Verity Craft and Christina Wedgwood, brought to you by Intelligent Inc. Thanks to our guest, Megan Dougherty, Jeff Ong for our theme music, and to you for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review if you liked what you heard, and here's to better thinking together.